What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna do a video on the most common mistakes of newbie bodybuilders. So I'll give you guys a couple of mistakes, some tips here and there. I'll try to keep this as short and concise as possible, but well, I do tend to ramble quite a lot, so bear with me. The first I wouldn't say most common mistake, but one of those mistakes that I tend to notice first would be the lack of attention towards execution. So I talk about execution a lot in a lot of my videos. So if you're wondering what that means, for me, execution would be a mix or a combination of your technique, your consistency, and your intentions. For execution, that is your technique. So have good technique, perform that exercise as you should. And then you have your consistency, making sure rep to rep it's looking somewhat the same. Of course, a little bit of technique breaking down, especially towards the end of the set, is normal. But as much as possible, you want to keep that under control. Make sure it still looks like you're doing the same exercise and you're not recruiting a bunch of different muscle groups to assist you. And of course, there is intent. So for this, you want to think about you want to think about the purpose of the exercise. What's it for? And if you have to make a couple of adjustments, let's say you're doing a lat pull down, but it's not quite comfortable how they show you in the videos, you might be able to make a couple of adjustments to make it more suitable for your lats, for your range of motion, and for your mechanics. The second most common mistake I've seen with novice bodybuilders would be their lack of tracking. So this is very important because if you don't log, if you don't track, then you don't know what you're missing and you don't know how you're progressing. So that's one thing you have to remember. This goes for both training and your nutrition. For training, you can always just use a physical notebook, track your reps, track your sets, track the loads you use. And as you go through it, week after week, try to build up on that, progressive overload. And for your nutrition, you just, I'm not saying you have to track your macros through an app. Right now I'm using MyFitnessPal, but I'm sure some people have used other apps. Those are all good too. But again, you don't really have to track the macros themselves. If you're one of those guys that prefers using something like a meal plan, that's totally fine. As long as you have an idea, or let's say a consistent idea of how much you're eating, of what you're eating, of how much you should add or how much you should reduce. This goes hand in hand with being able to perform better, not necessarily week after week, but over a period of time. This will help you train harder, especially if you know how much you're eating. I think the main issue here is that if you're not logging your food, is that sometimes you kind of just, let's just, for example, you've got a guy who usually eats around 3,000 calories a day, and then by the time he works out, he usually has 2,000 calories, and he performs well. So what if you have this same guy not tracking his food, has 3,000 calories, all of a sudden, he goes into his workout with around 400, 500 calories. Of course, you can't expect yourself to perform as well. Well, some people can, but some people won't. So if you can, try your best to track your meals or track your macros, and making sure for the purpose of progressive overload, you track your lifts as well. Another thing about making things more trackable is, of course, you have to make smarter decisions within training and with your food intake. So in terms of your food intake, if you want to track better, track more consistently, you want to look for food that contains less ingredient. Avoid putting in too many sauces that you can't track. If you're eating out, you can always choose something that has, you know, those less sauces, less ingredients. Basically a simple recipe. And for training, if you want to know how to progress better, you're gonna need to track more consistently, which means you might want to avoid using or depending too much on a spotter. You might want to reduce your, let's say, your drop sets just a little bit. Just because it gets harder every week to track your progress, you don't really know how many reps you can do with this weight if you're just having somebody else, you know, push. Maybe on one week it's going to be 20 pounds off. On another week it might be like 50 pounds. I've seen some people do this. This is fairly common. So if you can, try to limit the variables. Try to keep things simpler for yourself. This will, I'm pretty sure in the long run, this will help you out quite a lot. For the third most common, well, I don't think this list is not in order in any way. I'm just trying to remember things that are kind of common or that pop up on my Instagram messages or my Q&As. But I've noticed a lot of people do like to overthink quite a lot. So what I've learned throughout the years of lifting, of training and eating like a bodybuilder, is that bodybuilding is actually fairly simple. Especially when you're talking about building muscle, you really just have to like eat, you have to lift, you have to sleep, and you have to repeat the process again and again. It's not that hard. It's a really simple process that people just tend to overcomplicate. One thing I've noticed regarding how people overthink is they'll see a study and say, hey man, look, this study says I can totally eat 6 meals per day and that's the best way to do it. And then they find another study that says, hey dude, looks like 1 meal a day is actually the best. The problem is they try to do either a 6 meal a day plan or a 1 meal a day plan, but they can't even follow it. They're gonna end up going back to their usual 2 to 3 meals a day. And now they're just stuck. They don't know what they're doing. They kind of want to go to the 6 day a week, like a six meal day or like a 1 meal day. But honestly, just go with where you're comfortable. The fourth one here, which I've noticed quite a lot, especially here in the Philippines. Actually, you know what? Maybe everywhere you go, you'll see this. But if you're trying to be a bodybuilder, one big mistake is to try to stay lean year-round. This goes hand in hand with trying to compete year after year or season after season. As much as possible, you want to have an off-season. Doesn't really matter if it's a huge surplus. You don't have to you don't have to gain too much weight, but you also can't stay too lean. If you can, find that sweet spot where you're somewhat lean enough, comfortable enough, and try to, improve your performance there. Some people might find that sweet spot at a leaner body fat percentage, maybe around the 10 to 12. Some people might be more comfortable. I personally am more comfortable somewhere around the 16 to maybe 20% range. I think I perform my best there. I stay away from injury better when I'm somewhere between that 16 to 20% body fat. Another mistake I see quite often is when people listen, or when these bodybuilders listen to too many people at the same time. They're not really sure who to follow. They're all good advice. They all make sense. The problem is if you listen to too many people, well, not all of them are exactly credible. Not all of them know about your context. So just don't get too confused. Think about what is the underlying principle behind their advice. Maybe find a good average there, and then again put them all together, find what works best for you, and adjust depending or based on your context, based on your level of experience, how you respond to things. I think that's the best way to know. Find a couple of things that you think might work, try them out, and then put them all together. If you're not sure who you should be listening to, I think the best tip for that would be to get yourself a coach. Make sure it's a good coach. So this, I don't know, you can base it off of their social media, how they handle themselves, how they handle their training, their thought process when it comes to coaching. You can also base it on their clients, let's just say how they progress, how much they enjoy the coaching, and what they think of the coaching process itself. Now, when you get yourself a coach, make sure to trust them, make sure to listen to what they're saying. If you've already weighed out your options in terms of getting a coach and you choose one, make sure you trust them. Make sure to follow what they say. The problem with a lot of people is that they get a coach, they say they trust them, but they don't follow them, and when you don't get results, they're the ones to blame. All right? So if you're gonna get a coach, make sure it's a good coach. Make sure to listen to them. The next one here, I'm not even sure how many mistakes we've said so far, is the general lack of patience. I think this relates to the other one where I said the one about staying too lean. So some people are a little bit more impatient when it comes to bodybuilding, but the problem is when we're talking natural, drug-free bodybuilding, this shit's gonna take a while. And I mean, there's really not gonna be much of a difference after, let's say, your first 2 to 5 years. Let's say you make some big gains for your first 5 years. After that, it kind of slows down, and the longer you go, the slower it gets. So you have to think about bodybuilding. Well, I'm not gonna say it's a marathon. It's not a marathon, and neither is it a sprint. It's a mix of everything. Not something that you're supposed to go through the same way throughout the whole process. You might have your own, let's just call it your training identity. That might be your marathon. You might want to stick to your basics. You might want to keep it slow. But of course, there are sometimes, some occasions, like let's just say you're doing a contest prep, or you're trying to push up your weight to a new peak off-season weight. That's when you have to go on a little bit of a sprint. But in general, you don't want to be going on a sprint the whole way. If you're gonna try to go fast, if you're gonna try to go hard for as long as you can, that I think is the fastest way to burn out. And again, this is natural bodybuilding. This is a long game. So if you're just gonna burn yourself out within the first 2 to 3 years, you're not gonna last. Next one here, I think, would be the putting too much importance on motivation. Surprisingly, this is one of the most commonly asked questions on my Instagram Q&As. Honestly, I've never been the type of person to rely on motivation, especially not motivation alone. I like to rely more on the habits I built throughout the years, so that if in case my motivation dips, I can still keep going. Let's just say you're trying to eat more protein. Make that a habit. Make it a habit to sleep better. Make it a habit to have minimum standards in your lifting. At least when you're gonna come in fatigued, lacking motivation, you can still come in doing consistent work. If you don't have your motivation, rely on your habits. And hopefully, if you've slumped, if you've had a plateau with your motivation, if you can keep going, eventually, I think you'll be able to build up some momentum, and you'll be able to find that motivation again. Now, I think this will be the last mistake. It's not really a mistake, but one observation I've had with a lot of newbie bodybuilders that don't really get that much progress. Actually, this goes for not only the newbie bodybuilders, but also for those guys who've been lifting for about a decade, who've been competing for more than a decade, but haven't really seen much of a difference from year to year, from season to season. It's thinking that there's only one way to do things. So for bodybuilding, Good news is, I probably mentioned this sometimes. I probably mentioned this in my previous videos, but bodybuilding is not black and white. There are plenty of gray areas. Everything you see here is basically a tool. So let's just say something like IF, something like keto, something like doing 1 meal a day, carnivore, training to failure, doing just this or just that. That's not the case. There's plenty of ways to do things, plenty of ways to get you to your goals. The problem, I think, is people get so fixated on doing just one method that they miss out on the benefits of every other method out there that they over time. You can use those tools at the right, at the right situation, the right context, the right environment. And once you get that down, I think it'll be a lot easier to plan out your training, to plan out your nutrition. Just be open to using these different tools. That's gonna be the last one I'm gonna cover. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave a thumbs up. If you have your own suggestions on what I can cover next regarding these common bodybuilding mistakes, I'm sure I can do this again. I'm sure there's a lot more to cover. So if you have your own here, drop it down below in the comments and feel free to discuss. And do please subscribe to this channel.